In the darkness, the flames dance, consuming everything in their path. At the edges, the old photograph curls. Slowly disappearing into ash are the faces of the Merrick family. How it always ends is this. How it has always ended is this. For over 200 years, the same way has the Merrick family line terminated, in fire. Marcus Wells is my name, and the Ghastly Journal is what you're watching. Tonight, the cursed history of the Merrick family is what we uncover, where each branch of the family tree is destined to be consumed by flames. Before we delve into this harrowing tale, I must warn you, what you're about to hear isn't for the faint of heart. About death isn't just the story of the Merricks. It's about a pattern so consistent, so terrifying that rational explanation it defies. If in the dark you're watching this, perhaps now is the time to turn on a light. Just make sure a candle it's not. In 1796, our story begins, in the small coastal town of Blackmere, Massachusetts, a town that on any modern map no longer exists. It was here that the first Merrick, Jonathan Merrick, established what would become one of the wealthiest shipping families on the eastern seaboard. With prosperity, influence, and power would the Merrick name come to be associated. But beneath the veneer of success, something far more sinister lurked, a pattern that would follow the family for generations to come. On the back of Jonathan's ruthless business acumen, the Merrick Shipping Company was built. While his competitors struggled with the unpredictable nature of seafaring trade, Jonathan's ships always seemed to find calm waters. Their destinations, his cargoes always reached. His expectations, his profits always exceeded. Uncanny luck, some called it. Of darker arrangements, others whispered. Tracing the Merrick family history, I've spent the last 3 years, poring over forgotten documents, interviewing distant relatives, and piecing together a puzzle that spans centuries. A pattern so clear, so undeniable was what I found, that it sent chills down my spine. At a price, the Merrick family prosperity always came, and in flames, that price was always paid. With Jonathan himself, the patriarch, let's start. Born in 1765 to poor farmers in rural Massachusetts, nothing in his early life was there to suggest the wealth he would later amass. Of tuberculosis, his parents died when he was just 14, leaving him alone and destitute. The same path as countless other orphans of the era, by all accounts, he should have followed. Servitude, hardship, perhaps an early grave. Yet by 25, enough capital he had somehow acquired to purchase his first ship. A fleet, by 30, he owned. Suspiciously absent are the records of how exactly he made this dramatic reversal of fortune. In local church records lies the only clue, which note that for exactly 1 year after his parents' death, young Jonathan disappeared. When he returned to Blackmere, different he was, more confident, more driven, and in possession of a peculiar ring with a black stone that he was never seen without. A diary entry from Reverend Thomas Holloway dated March 12, 1795, I found. He writes, "Young Merrick's success continues to confound. The man seems touched by divine providence, though a certain unease in his presence, I confess. A knowledge that belies his years, his eyes hold, and when of the future he speaks, it is with such certainty that one cannot help but wonder from where such confidence springs. I asked him once about the curious ring he wears, he merely smiled and said a reminder of a promise made it was. When pressed further, no more he would say." Deeper into the archives diving, I discovered an account from a local fisherman named Ezekiel Porter. In his personal journal dated October 1781, he describes encountering Jonathan during that mysterious year of absence. "Saw the Merrick boy today where no Merrick boy should be. At the edge of Blackwood Forest, he was standing, conversing with something in the shadows. Closer, I dared not approach, for the air around him seemed to shimmer with heat, though the day was bitter cold. When he turned and saw me watching, like polished copper, his eyes reflected the setting sun. I fled and did not look back." Particularly intriguing is this testimony because the Blackwood Forest that Porter mentions was known locally as a place of ill repute. As a place of ill repute, colonial-era records indicate that the indigenous peoples of the region avoided it entirely, calling it the place where the fire spirits dwell. Among the trees, early settlers reported strange lights and unexplained warm spots even in the depths of winter. By the time Jonathan Merrick returned to Blackmere, in mysterious fires, the forest had already claimed the lives of several settlers. A direct descendant of the Wampanoag tribe that originally inhabited the Blackmere region, I've interviewed. According to their oral tradition, once the site of a sacred ritual that went horribly wrong was Blackwood Forest. With what they called the fire that lives between worlds, their ancestors had attempted to communicate, a powerful entity that could bestow blessings of warmth and protection. But by European settlers, the ritual was interrupted, breaking the careful boundaries that had been established. After that, unbound and hungry the entity became. The tribal elder told me, our people knew to leave offerings at the edge of the forest. Never meat, never blood. Our warnings, the settlers ignored. In the sacred woods, they hunted. On hungry soil, they spilled blood. And what was not freely given, the fire that lives between worlds began to take. As superstition, most historians dismiss these stories. But from 1650 to 1800, an unusual number of fire-related deaths in the Blackmere region the historical record shows. What's more, from 1762, a British anthropologist's journal describes a stone altar deep in Blackwood Forest, surrounded by a perfect circle where nothing would grow. Evidence of extreme heat, the anthropologist noted that the altar stone showed portions of it actually vitrified, requiring temperatures far beyond what ordinary wood fires could produce. In 1797, Jonathan married Eleanor Whitfield, the daughter of a respected local physician. 3 children they had. William, born in 1798, Elizabeth in 1800, and Thomas in 1802. Overlooking the harbor, the family lived in a grand mansion, a testament to Jonathan's meteoric rise. For almost 20 years, the very picture of success and social standing were the Merricks. In this story, Eleanor Merrick remains something of an enigma. As beautiful but reserved, most accounts describe her, rarely participating in the town's social events despite her husband's prominence. Her father, Dr. Whitfield, initially opposed the match, though in any surviving documents, his reasons were never explicitly stated. From Eleanor's cousin Abigail to her sister in Boston, a letter hints at deeper concerns. Uncle Thomas fears there is something not right about the Merrick fellow. He says the look in his eyes he has seen before in patients who have made bargains with their own sanity. But besotted is Eleanor and will hear no word against him. A life free from the hardships that claimed her mother, she claims he has promised her. In a house fire, Eleanor's mother had died when Eleanor was just 6 years old. Perhaps between Eleanor and Jonathan, this shared experience of losing parents to tragedy created a bond. Or perhaps more disturbingly, for what was to come, it made her the perfect partner. In luxury unimaginable to most Americans of the era, the Merrick children grew up. They had private tutors, fine clothes imported from Europe, and every advantage wealth could provide. Yet, something unusual about them as well, contemporaries noted. As preternaturally serious, William, the eldest, was described by his headmaster at Phillips Exeter Academy. For her fascination with fire, Elizabeth was known, constantly tending the hearth and staring into the flames for hours. From vivid nightmares, Thomas, the youngest, suffered, that he would later describe in his medical diaries as visions of a world consumed by cleansing fire. But on the night of December 21, 1816, the winter solstice, everything changed. In the Merrick mansion, a fire broke out. With unnatural purpose, witnesses described flames that seemed to move, burning blue and white rather than orange and red. By dawn, nothing but cinders and ash was the magnificent house. The charred remains of Jonathan and Eleanor Merrick were found among the ruins. A tragic accident, the official report called it, perhaps a candle left burning or a log rolling from the fireplace. But there were whispers, as in small towns there always are. From the house that night, some said they heard strange chanting coming. Standing at an upstairs window as the flames engulfed him, others claimed to have seen Jonathan, making no attempt to escape, his expression one of grim acceptance. From the Merrick's housemaid, Sarah Pendleton, comes the most disturbing account. In a sworn statement to the town magistrate, she claimed that in the weeks leading up to the fire, strangely Jonathan had been acting. For days at a time, he would lock himself in his study. Of the approaching due date and the terms being satisfied, he spoke. Most chillingly, one evening, she overheard him tell Eleanor, "The fire comes for us all in the end. Of our bargain, it is the nature." Sarah Pendleton's descendants I managed to track down, who had preserved a private memoir she wrote in her later years. On the events leading up to that fateful night, in it, she elaborates. Mr. Merrick began marking the days off on a calendar, each X made with such force that the quill sometimes tore through the paper. At odd hours, Mrs. Merrick took to weeping, though she would compose herself immediately if the children entered the room. 3 days before the fire, to his study separately, Mr. Merrick called each child. What was said, I could not hear, but each emerged looking solemn. The next day, for all 3 children to be elsewhere on the night of the 21st, arrangements were suddenly made. About this change in plans, when I asked Mrs. Merrick, she smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes, and said, "The children must live, Sarah. That is the most important thing. The children must live." Curiously, that night, the 3 Merrick children were not at home. William, then 18, away at university was. Elizabeth, 16, with her maternal grandparents was staying. And Thomas, 14, at a boarding school in Boston was. All 3 Merrick children survived, ensuring the family line would continue. And continue it did. But to the next generation of Merricks, what happened? That's where our tale becomes truly unsettling. His father's business, William Merrick inherited and expanded it further. In 1825, he married Catherine Montgomery and they had 2 children, Jonathan II, named after his grandfather, and Victoria. As a shrewd but fair businessman, William was known, without the rumors of dark dealings that had surrounded his father. Yet in the archives of the Massachusetts Historical Society, William's personal correspondence, which I discovered, reveals a man haunted by his family's past. In a letter to his brother Thomas dated 1830, he writes, "I find myself calculating the years remaining to us. Father died in 1816. 20 years from then will be 1836. At my children I look, at my dear Catherine, and I wonder, do they sense it too? Of the flames, the inexorable approach. I have considered telling Catherine everything, but how does one begin such a conversation? My dear, I believe my family is cursed to die by fire. She would think me mad. Perhaps I am." William's sister, Elizabeth Merrick, never married, devoting her life instead to charitable works. Using her substantial inheritance, she established an orphanage in New York. In a fire that destroyed the orphanage, she died, you guessed it, on December 21, 1836, the very same night as her brother. Remarkably, every child in the orphanage was safely evacuated. Only Elizabeth perished. This telling detail, a newspaper account of the orphanage fire contains. The very day before the tragic event, Miss Merrick had conducted a fire drill with all the children and staff. With unusual precision, they were instructed on exactly how to exit the building and where to gather. When shortly after midnight the actual fire broke out, the children followed these instructions perfectly. That Miss Merrick herself remained behind, several reported, standing in the central hall as the flames closed in around her. A strange black ring, and speaking to the fire itself, one child claimed that Miss Merrick was holding. The youngest of Jonathan's children, Thomas Merrick, became a physician. In 1830, he married Sophia Reynolds and they had 3 children, Ella Laner, Robert, and James. With his family history, Thomas was reportedly obsessed, collecting every document and artifact related to his father. According to his colleague, Dr. James Wilson, that he was researching a way to break the chain, Thomas once confided. At the Johns Hopkins University archives, Thomas's medical journals reveal a man desperately seeking scientific explanations for what he increasingly believed was a supernatural phenomenon. With fire-resistant materials, he conducted experiments, studied cases of spontaneous human combustion, and even investigated ancient fire cults. In an entry dated June 1835, he writes, "I have consulted with a practitioner of the occult sciences against all my better judgments as a man of medicine. Father's ring, which William has entrusted to me for my research, she examined, and turned pale. It contains something that does not belong in our world," she said, "something that feeds on the moment of fiery transformation. If the curse could be broken, when I asked, she would say only that what is bound by blood can only be unbound by blood. To decipher this riddle, I fear I am running out of time." Whatever he discovered, it wasn't enough. On December 21, 1836, Thomas and Sophia Merrick died when their Baltimore home erupted in flames. All three of their children survived, having been sent to stay with Sophia's sister the day before. In Thomas's office, a letter found, dated December 20th, read simply, "I have failed to find a solution. The price must be paid. Tomorrow, send the children away. To continue the search, they must live. The pattern yet, are you seeing? 3 siblings, all dying on the exact same night, exactly 20 years after their parents' death. All in separate cities, all in fires, all with their children mysteriously absent. But surely this is just a bizarre coincidence, right? Tragic, yes, unusual certainly, but nothing supernatural." That's what I told myself when I first uncovered this chapter of the Merrick history. But then I traced the next generation and the next and the next. Jonathan too, Victoria, Eleanor, Robert, James. All 5 cousins lived separate lives in different parts of the country. All 5 married and had children. All 5 died on December 21, 1856. Again, exactly 20 years later, all in fires, all with their children safely away from home. Of Victoria Merrick's death, I found a particularly detailed account from the diary of her lady's maid. How Victoria had been plagued by nightmares in the weeks leading up to December 21, she describes. "Mrs. Chambers wakes screaming nearly every night now, clutching at her throat as if she cannot breathe. Of dreams where she stands in a circle of blue fire facing a figure made of smoke and ember, she speaks. Into her chest, this figure reaches and pulls out a glowing coal which it consumes. Both agony and ecstasy, she says the pain is exquisite. I have urged her to see a doctor, but she only smiles sadly and says there is no cure for her condition." On the morning of December 21, to stay with her husband's parents, Victoria sent her children, claiming they were planning a special Christmas surprise that required the children's absence. That evening, she dismissed all the servants except her lady's maid, who recorded, "Mrs. Chambers sat at her vanity, brushing her hair 100 strokes, as she does every night. But tonight, to her reflection she spoke as if it were another person entirely. I am ready," she said. "My part of the bargain, I have kept. My children have prospered. They have never known hunger or fear. And now the price I pay." She then asked me to leave the house and not return until morning. I was reluctant, but she pressed a generous purse into my hands and said, "Please, this is how it must be." As I walked down the drive, I turned back once. At her bedroom window, Mrs. Chambers was standing, silhouetted against the light. As I watched, from yellow to blue, the light behind her turned, and then the whole room seemed to erupt in flames. Through the generations, this pattern repeats with mathematical precision. For 20 years, the surviving Merrick children would live relatively normal lives. They would marry. They would have children. And then on the winter solstice, exactly 20 years after their parents' fiery deaths, they too would perish in flames, having ensured their children were elsewhere. As if each generation knew exactly when and how they would die. As if they had inherited not just wealth, but a terrible knowledge and perhaps a terrible burden. Journal entries, letters, and testimonials from Merrick family members across the generations, I found. About their fate, many express a grim resignation. What some explicitly referred to as the curse or the compact, others document desperate attempts to break. Maria Merrick writing in 1895. I have consulted mediums, priests, and scholars. To the far corners of the earth seeking anyone who might help us escape our fate, I have traveled. But to the same conclusion, all roads lead. The debt must be paid. The fire must be fed. December 21st, 1896. I have 10 months remaining. In her later entries, Maria describes visiting a temple in Nepal where the monks kept an eternal flame that allegedly contained a similar entity to the one bound to the Merrick family. The head monk told her, "Fire is transformation. Between states of being, it is the bridge. With a being that exists in the moment of transformation, your ancestor made a pact. Neither fully in our world nor fully outside it. On the energy released when a human life is consumed by flames, it feeds, particularly lives that carry a certain bloodline. The more generations that pass through the fire, the stronger the entity becomes." Henry Merrick in a letter to his wife dated 1912. To an obscure cult in Eastern Europe, I've traced the black ring. One of 7 objects that combined can deal with forces beyond our understanding, they claim it's. Such a deal, Jonathan Merrick made, Elizabeth. For each generation, he traded 20 years of prosperity with payment due in fire. How to break it, I'm close to understanding, but time grows short. With occult scholars across Europe, Henry's subsequent correspondence reveals fragments of a troubling story. Apparently, the first to make such a bargain wasn't Jonathan Merrick. Many times throughout history, the black ring had changed hands, always following a similar pattern. A desperate individual would acquire it, make a pact, enjoy a period of prosperity, and then die in flames. What made Jonathan's case unique was that he somehow bound his descendants to the pact as well, creating a multi-generational covenant that was far more powerful and far more difficult to break. Alexander Merrick, journal entry from 1934. What I've long suspected, grandfather's papers confirm. Jonathan didn't just make a deal for himself. He bound all his descendants. 20 years of guaranteed success and protection. Then the fire comes. To continue the cycle, the children are spared. In the hidden compartment beneath the library floor, I've left all my research. Perhaps where I have failed, they will succeed. About why Jonathan would have made such a bargain, Alexander's research notes contain a fascinating theory. During the year of Jonathan's disappearance, a severe famine struck much of New England. Like Jonathan, many orphan children died of starvation or disease. That Jonathan, faced with his own mortality and with no family to protect him, was the perfect target for an entity offering survival and prosperity in exchange for a delayed payment, Alexander posits. But why bind his descendants? Alexander writes, I believe the entity required a greater payment for greater rewards. Jonathan didn't just want to survive. He wanted to thrive, to build a dynasty. And so he offered not just his own life, but the lives of generations of mess yet unborn. Through World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, and beyond, the pattern held true. No matter where the Mers were or what precautions they took, the fires always found them. In a hotel fire in Paris, one married couple died, another in a forest fire in Oregon. A third when their car inexplicably burst into flames on a remote country road. That of Richard and Margaret Merrick, who died in 1916, was one particularly eerie case. About their impending fate, they had become increasingly paranoid and built a house entirely of concrete and steel with no flammable materials whatsoever. At the time, they installed the most advanced fire suppression systems available. On December 21st, in a specially constructed safe room with walls of solid concrete 18 inches thick, they sealed themselves. The next morning, into the safe room authorities broke and found nothing but ash. Completely untouched was the rest of the fireproof house. Always on December 21st, always exactly 20 years after their parents' deaths, always with their children safely elsewhere. Around their fateful date, the Merricks developed rituals. On December 20th, many would hold family gatherings, saying formal goodbyes to their children. To their children years later, some wrote letters to be delivered, explaining the family curse and preparing them for their own eventual fate. Others, like Edward Merrick in 1936, tried to document the experience itself by setting up automatic cameras in their homes. Invariably destroyed in the fires, the cameras were, but one partially melted film strip showed a frame of his father seemingly conversing with a humanoid shape composed entirely of blue flame, Edward's son reported. The most recent confirmed case I could find was Charles and Diana Merrick, who died when their Chicago apartment building caught fire on December 21, 1976. With friends that night, their son, James Merrick, was staying. What makes the Charles and Diana case particularly unusual was the extraordinary effort they made to document their fate for their son. Containing detailed journals, family records, and even audio recordings explaining the Merrick curse, they left behind a steel safe. The recordings, which I've had the privilege of listening to, include Charles Merrick's calm voice explaining, "James, if you're hearing this, then what we've told you has come to pass. We want you to understand that we did not choose this fate, but it chose us. What you do with this knowledge is your decision. You can run as many Merricks have tried to do. You can fight as others have attempted, or you can accept and prepare as most of us have done. But know this, the fire always finds its way to me blood." Equally haunting is Diana's voice on the tapes. "My darling boy, I want you to know that these 20 years with you have been the greatest blessing of my life. For the joy of being your mother, I would endure this fate 1,000 times. Real is the prosperity the curse brings. For anything material, you will never want. But the price is high, too high. I've begged your father to find a way to break this chain. But if you're listening to this, we have failed. I'm so sorry, James. So very sorry." On the blaze that killed Charles and Diana, the Chicago Fire Department's report noted several anomalies. Simultaneously in multiple locations within the apartment, the fire appeared to have started. Far exceeding normal residential fires, it burned at temperatures hot enough to melt portions of the building's steel support beams. And most tellingly, though the entire building was affected, the only fatalities were Charles and Diana Merrick. Every other resident managed to escape. Not by smoke alarms, many reporting that they were awakened, but by a sense of urgent dread that drove them from their beds moments before the fire spread to their units. Unlike previous generations, Charles and Diana had only one child. 3 years before their deaths, their neighbor reported overhearing a heated argument between them. Diana was shouting, "We can't do this to another child. Isn't one sacrifice enough?" This suggests that the Merricks may have limited their family size deliberately, knowing the fate that awaited them and wishing to minimize the continuation of the curse. And this is where my research hit a wall. After 1980, I could find no record of James Merrick. As if he vanished. No death certificate, no marriage license, no property records, nothing. I spent months searching, following every possible lead. I checked missing persons reports, passport applications, property transfers, and tax records. Who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found, I hired a private investigator. Around 1980, all trails went cold when James, then 24, withdrew all his money from his bank accounts and disappeared. And just when I was about to give up, I received an anonymous email. It contained only an address in a small town in Washington state and the words, "If you want to know the truth about the mayor, come alone on the winter solstice." From an account that was created solely to send me that message and was deleted immediately afterward, the email came. I tried to trace the IP address, but it had been carefully routed through multiple proxies. Someone didn't just want to remain anonymous. They were an expert at ensuring their digital footprint was untraceable. I'm not usually one to follow mysterious instructions from anonymous sources, but after 3 years of researching the Merrick curse, I couldn't resist. So, on December 21, 2023, I found myself driving down a winding forest road toward a remote cabin. Deep in the Olympic Peninsula, the cabin was surrounded by towering evergreens that blocked most of the weak winter sunlight. A simple structure, well maintained, but deliberately isolated. No neighbors for miles, no cell phone reception, just wilderness and silence. In his late 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much, the man who greeted me was simply as James. He introduced himself. He invited me inside, and as we sat by a fire, yes, a fire, he told me the rest of the story. Not just from the curse, but from the Merrick name itself. James Merrick had spent his life running. He had changed his identity, moved constantly, and never married or had children. To break the cycle, to end the Merrick line with him, he was trying. I was 19 when my parents sat me down and told me everything, James said, his voice raspy from years of disuse. At first, I thought it was some kind of sick joke, but they had documentation, journals, letters, photographs, all showing the same pattern repeating through the generations. They gave me a choice. I could accept the 20 years of prosperity that was my birthright, have children to continue the line, and then meet the flames on December 21, 1996. Or I could run, hide, change my name, and never have children. I chose to run. James explained that the Merrick curse came with benefits as well as costs. Each Merrick would enjoy 20 years of uncanny good fortune, successful businesses, protection from illness and accident, a charmed life in every respect. But they would know exactly when and how that life would end. The curse isn't just about dying in fire, he told me. It's about continuing the line. Each generation must produce children to carry on the name, to feed the cycle. This, my ancestors understood. They made sure their children were safe when the fire came. Not just out of love, but out of obligation to the compact. According to James, with any ordinary entity, Jonathan Merrick hadn't made a deal. Something ancient was the being he encountered during that missing year, something that fed on a very specific type of energy. When a human life is consumed by flames, the transitional moment. The entity has many names in many cultures, James said. In some traditions, it's called the Fire Walker. In others, the Ember King or the Ash Prince. It exists in the space between burning and burned. In the precise moment when matter transforms from one state to another through fire, it can't fully enter our world, but it can make bargains through certain objects, like the black ring my ancestor wore. A bargain, my great-great-great-grandfather made, James said. 20 years of prosperity and protection for each generation in exchange for a fiery death that feeds the entity. But here's the crucial part. The compact requires the continuation of the bloodline. Each generation must produce children who will eventually feed the flames themselves. James described how over the decades he had researched his family's curse while staying off the grid. He had traveled to obscure libraries, consulted with experts in the occult, and even visited sites where similar entities were said to be bound. Filled with cramped handwriting, diagrams of arcane symbols, and photographs of ancient texts, he showed me notebooks. A loophole, James believed he had found. By refusing to have children, by ending the Merrick line with himself, he thought he could break the cycle. For decades, he lived with this conviction, moving from place to place, always looking over his shoulder. But then I realized something, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'm not the last Merrick. James told me that his father, Charles, had an affair before James was born. A child that Charles never knew about. This resulted in a half-brother to James named Michael. With his mother's surname, Michael had grown up, unaware of his Merrick heritage or the curse that came with it. He had children of his own who had children in turn. An entire branch of the Merrick family tree, oblivious to their doom. By accident, I discovered this, James said. I was researching my father's life, trying to understand if he had found any solutions that he hadn't shared with me. I found letters from a woman named Rebecca Lawson claiming that her son was Charles's child. My father apparently never saw these letters. They were returned unopened after my parents moved from their previous address. This unknown branch of the family, James spent years tracking down. He found that Michael Lawson had married and had 2 daughters, one of whom, Jessica, had married a man named Robert Anderson and had 2 children of her own. All of them completely unaware of their Merrick blood and the doom it carried. I've been tracking them, James said, trying to warn them. But they think I'm just a crazy old man. And now it's too late. According to James' calculations, on December 21, 2023, that very night, the descendants of Michael Merrick were due to face the fire. The curse is precise, James explained. 20 years after the previous Merrick deaths. My parents died in 1976. Michael, who never knew he was a Merrick, died of natural causes in 1998. But his daughter, Jessica, carries the blood. And tonight will be exactly 20 years since the last death in her direct line. Her grandmother, Rebecca Lawson, who died on December 21, 2003. As if on cue, James' phone rang. He answered, listened for a moment, then looked at me with an expression of grim validation. It started, he said. A house fire in Portland. The Anderson family. Jessica Anderson was born Jessica Lawson, Michael's daughter. We turned on the local news and sure enough, there was breaking coverage of a major house fire in Portland, just 3 hours south of our location. The reporters were saying that the fire had started suddenly and spread with unusual speed. Firefighters were battling the blaze, but the house was likely a total loss. Then came the update that made my blood run cold. 2 bodies had been found inside. Robert and Jessica Anderson. Their teenage children had been at a school event. The news report included interviews with neighbors, one of whom said, "It was the strangest thing. The flames were blue, almost white, and they moved like they had a mind of their own, forming shapes that looked almost human." Another neighbor mentioned that Jessica had been acting strangely in recent days, like she knew something was coming. She had reportedly insisted that her children attend a school concert that evening, even though they had initially wanted to stay home. James looked at me, his eyes reflecting the flickering light from the fireplace. "It never ends," he said, "unless..." He stood up and walked to a chest in the corner of the cabin. From it he removed an old wooden box. Inside was a ring with a black stone, the same ring described in accounts of Jonathan Merrick. "This is what binds us," James said. "This is the physical manifestation of the compact. I've spent my life researching how to break it, and I finally found the answer." At first glance, the ring looked unremarkable. A simple band of dark metal with a black stone that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. But the longer I looked at it, the more unsettling it became. The stone seemed to have depth beyond its physical dimensions, as if I was looking into a bottomless well. And was it my imagination, or did the air around it shimmer slightly, like heat rising from hot pavement? According to James, by a willing sacrifice, the entity that Jonathan Merrick made his deal with could only be defeated. A Merrick who would choose to end the cycle by offering themselves to the flames without producing heirs. Not running from the curse, but facing it head-on. The entity feeds on fear, James explained, on the desperate struggle to escape the inevitable. My ancestors knew they would die, but they fought against it until the end. They made arrangements for their children, yes, but they never truly accepted their fate. I believe that if a Merrick willingly gives themselves to the fire without resistance and without continuing the bloodline, the compact can be broken. That's why I contacted you, James said. I need a witness, someone to tell the story, to warn any Mers who might still be out there. The cycle can be broken, but only through sacrifice. I tried to talk him out of it. I suggested we look for other solutions, that we take the ring to experts. But James was resolute. I'm 70 years old, he said. I've lived my life in fear, always running. Tonight, I stop running. He showed me a room at the back of the cabin filled with research materials, books, manuscripts, digital files. Take these, he said. Study them, understand what we're dealing with, and then tell our story. As the evening wore on, increasingly calm, almost serene, James became. He made tea, spoke of his life in hiding, and shared memories of his parents. They were good people, he said, caught in a trap set generations before their birth. They gave me every advantage they could, knowing they wouldn't live to see me grow up. Their last gift to me was the truth, however terrible. At precisely 11:45 p.m., on his finger, James placed the ring, and the black stone seemed to swallow the light around it. Noticeably, the temperature in the cabin rose, though the fire in the hearth had died down to embers. James looked at me one last time. "Leave now," he said. "Tell our story, and if you ever meet another Merrick, tell them there is a way out." I didn't want to go, but something in his eyes, a certainty, a peace, made me obey. The research materials he had given me, I gathered and headed for the door. As I reached the threshold, in a language I didn't recognize, I heard James begin to speak. Ancient words with harsh consonants and flowing vowels. With heat, the air grew thick. I got in my car and drove about a mile down the road. That's when I saw the flames. Engulfed, the cabin was, the fire burning with that same unnatural blue-white color described by witnesses of the very first Merrick fire over 200 years ago. I called 911, but I knew it was too late. His choice, James Merrick had made. With impossible intensity, the fire burned. By the time emergency services arrived, of the cabin but a circle of ash, there was nothing left. No structural remains, no personal effects, nothing. Just a perfect circle of white ash in the middle of an otherwise untouched forest clearing. The firefighters were baffled. One of them told me he'd never seen anything like it in 30 years of service. In the months since that night, I've been monitoring news reports of fires, obituaries, and public records. As far as I can tell, no one with the Merrick name or bloodline has died in a fire. The cycle, for now, at least seems to be broken. James' research materials, I've been studying, trying to make sense of the Merrick curse and the entity behind it. Much of it corroborates what I had already discovered, but there are new details as well. References to similar cases throughout history, theories about the nature of the entity and possible methods to bind or banish it. But I'm not taking any chances. My testimony is this video, this account of the Merrick family curse. It's my warning to anyone out there who might carry Merrick blood knowingly or not. And it's also a question to you, the viewer. For 20 years of guaranteed success, what would you sacrifice? What price would you pay for protection from life's random cruelties? And if that price extended beyond your own life to the lives of generations yet unborn, would you still pay it? In 1795,